Jake Martinez sat in his chair and felt his hands shake with anger. He had been the human ambassador to the Galactic Council for 2 years now. 2 long years of listening to aliens treat humans like children. 2 years of being told that humanity was too young, too violent, and too stupid to have a real voice in galactic affairs. The giant meeting hall was full of creatures from across the galaxy. There were the tall, blue-skinned Zenthranes with their cold silver eyes. The rock-like beings. From Arcturus floated above their seats, their voices sounding like grinding stone. Spider-like creatures from the rim worlds clicked and hissed in their own language. All of them looked down on humans. Today was supposed to be different. Jake had come with proof that humans deserved full membership in the council. He brought reports showing how human doctors had saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. He had trade records proving that human ships carried more cargo than any other species. He even had military reports showing that human forces kept the peace in sectors that other species were too afraid to patrol. But High Counselor Kethmos, a crystal being that looked like a living diamond, had barely glanced at the documents. "These numbers mean nothing," the counselor had said in his ringing voice. "Any species can move boxes from one place to another. Any species can point weapons at pirates. This does not make you equals to civilizations that have existed for thousands of years." Lisa Rodriguez, who sat next to Jake, was the smartest lawyer he had ever met. She had spent months preparing legal arguments for why humans should get voting rights. But when she tried to speak, Counselor Vexithara had cut her off with a wave of her clawed hand. "Humans are guests here," the reptilian female had hissed. "Guests do not make demands of their hosts. You should be grateful we allow you to observe our proceedings at all." Captain Tony Blake, the military man on their team, had his jaw clenched, so tight that Jake worried he might crack his teeth. Tony had fought in 3 major battles to protect Council worlds from raiders. He had scars across his face from saving a Zenthranian colony ship. But when he tried to remind the Council of human military service, they had laughed. "Your primitive weapons and crude tactics may work against pirates," Admiral Corthan had said, his bug-like mandibles clicking with amusement. "But do not mistake pest control for real military capability." The worst part came when they started talking about human territory. Earth and its colonies controlled 12 star systems. Not much compared to empires that spanned hundreds of worlds, but those systems were home to 8 billion humans. Jake had asked for those systems to be officially recognized as sovereign human space. The response had been crushing. "The galaxy does not recognize the territorial claims of species that have not proven their worth," Kethmos had declared. "When humans have contributed something meaningful to galactic civilization, perhaps we will consider your requests. Something meaningful." Jake almost laughed at the irony. Every day, human cargo ships delivered food to worlds that could not feed themselves. Human medical teams worked around the clock in hospitals across the galaxy. Human engineers maintained the jump gates that allowed faster-than-light travel. Human farmers had terraformed dead worlds into garden paradises. But none of that mattered to the Council. In their eyes, humans were still the newest kids in the galactic neighborhood. They were the species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were the ones who had to prove themselves worthy of respect. Jake looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces. Some looked bored. Others seemed amused by the human delegation. A few appeared openly hostile. But none showed any sign of respect or even basic courtesy. He thought about his daughter back on Earth. Amy was 7 years old and dreamed of becoming a doctor, like the human medics who worked on alien worlds. She believed that humans and aliens could be friends and partners. Jake had believed that too once, but after 2 years of insults and dismissal, he was done believing. The final straw came when Counselor Vexithara stood up to address the chamber. Her yellow eyes fixed on Jake as she spoke. "Perhaps it is time for humans to understand their place in the galactic order. You are not partners. You are not equals. You are a useful labor force, nothing more. Be grateful for that role and stop reaching for things beyond your capability." The chamber erupted in approving sounds. Clicks, hisses, musical tones, and grinding noises that Jake had learned meant agreement. The assembled representatives of galactic civilization were united in their contempt for humanity. Jake felt something break inside him. Not his spirit, but his patience. He had spent 2 years trying to earn respect through diplomacy and compromise. He had swallowed insults and ignored provocations. He had believed that eventually the aliens would see humans as equals. But that day would never come. The council would always see humans as servants, not partners. He stood up slowly and looked around the chamber. Lisa and Tony were watching him with concern. They knew that look. They had worked with Jake long enough to recognize when he had reached his limit. The United Earth Federation formally withdraws from these proceedings, Jake said. His voice was calm but carried clearly through the massive hall. The alien chatter died as his words sank in. Jake began gathering his papers and files. Lisa and Tony followed his lead, packing up their materials with practiced efficiency. They had prepared for this possibility, though Jake had hoped it would never come to this. Furthermore, Jake continued as he sealed his briefcase, Earth hereby suspends all cooperative agreements with Council member species. Human medical teams will return home. Human cargo ships will restrict themselves to human space. Human security forces will withdraw from all non-human territories. The chamber was dead silent now. Even the constant background hum of the translation system seemed muted. Jake could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching him as he walked toward the exit. Counselor Vexathera found her voice first. You cannot be serious. Where will you go? What will you do without the guidance of your betters? Jake stopped at the chamber doors and turned back one last time. We will do what humans have always done, Counselor. We will take care of ourselves. He paused and let his eyes sweep across the assembled aliens. Good luck taking care of yourselves. The massive doors sealed behind them with a soft hiss. As they walked down the corridor toward their ship, Jake heard Vexathera's laughter echoing from the chamber. Let them sulk, her voice carried through the walls. What can one primitive species possibly do to us? Jake smiled grimly as they boarded their ship. The aliens were about to find out exactly what humans could do. More importantly, they were about to discover what humans would not do anymore. Danny Foster was loading cargo onto his ship when the alarm started blaring. The sound echoed through the massive docking bay of Kepler Station, one of the biggest trade hubs in Council space. Danny had been running cargo between human and alien worlds for 15 years. He knew every sound the station made, but this alarm was new. Attention all human vessels, came the cold voice over the station speakers. By order of the Galactic Council, human ships are no longer permitted to dock at Council-regulated facilities. All human crews have 1 hour to complete current business and depart. Danny dropped the cargo container he was carrying. It hit the metal floor with a loud clang that seemed to echo his shock. Around him, other human workers stopped what they were doing. The alien dock workers kept moving, but Danny noticed they would not look at the humans anymore. What does that mean? Asked Maria Santos, who ran a small shipping company with 3 cargo haulers. Her face had gone pale. They cannot just kick us out. We have contracts, we have been working these routes for decades. But the station security forces were already moving. Tall, insect-like hegemony guards marched through the docking bays with their energy weapons visible. They were not pointing the weapons at anyone, but the message was clear. Humans were no longer welcome. Danny thought about his cargo hold, filled with medical supplies bound for 6 different alien colonies. Anti-cancer drugs made in the labs on Mars. Painkillers that only human chemists knew how to produce. Vaccines for diseases that killed thousands of aliens every year. Without these medicines, people would die. He tried to contact the colonies to explain what was happening, but his communication requests were denied. Human vessels are restricted from Council communication networks, was all the system would tell him. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Kevin Torres received an emergency message on his flagship. He commanded the Third Fleet, which protected the Outer Rim territories from pirates and raiders. These were the dangerous sectors that the main Council fleets avoided. Too much risk, they said. Not enough profit to make it worth their time. Admiral, came the voice of his communications officer, Lieutenant Pete Johnson. We are getting withdrawal. Orders from Earth Command. All human forces are to return to human-controlled space immediately. Kevin looked at the tactical display showing his fleet's positions. 27 ships spread across 4 star systems, keeping the peace in areas that had been lawless wastelands before humans arrived. Pirates and slavers had terrorized these regions for centuries, until human warships drove them out. "Sir," said Captain Jenny Walsh from the bridge of her destroyer, "what about the colonies we protect? Some of these worlds have no defense forces of their own. If we leave, the raiders will be back within days." Kevin closed his eyes. He had grown up on one of these outer rim worlds. He knew what it was like to live in fear of pirate attacks. But his orders were clear. "Begin withdrawal procedures," he said into his comm unit. "All ships return to Rally Point Alpha." As the human fleet prepared to leave, emergency calls started, flooding their communication systems. Colony governors begged them to stay. Mayors of small towns pleaded for protection. But the orders from Earth were final. Humans would no longer risk their lives for people who saw them as servants. Dr. Amy Chen sat in her office at the Titan Medical Center and watched her communication board light up like a Christmas tree. Every light represented a desperate call from somewhere in the galaxy. Alien hospitals needing human medicines. Research stations running out of the drugs that kept their scientists alive. Entire worlds facing medical disasters without human support. The worst calls came from the luxury worlds where the galactic elite lived. These planets depended on human anti-aging treatments that kept their residents looking young for centuries. Without the regular shipments of life extension drugs, the wealthy and powerful would start aging at normal rates for the first time in their long lives. "Dr. Chen," said her assistant, a young man named Brad Cooper, "the Zenthranian Health Ministry is offering us 50 times the normal payment for an emergency shipment of neural enhancement drugs." Amy shook her head. "No shipments to Council worlds. Those are the orders from Earth." She looked at the communication board with its hundreds of flashing lights. "Send the same message to everyone. Human medical aid to Council territories has been suspended indefinitely." On Earth, President Nicole Hayes stood before the Global Assembly. Representatives from every human colony watched as she announced the new policy that would change everything. "For 50 years, she said, humanity has bent over backward to earn respect from species that saw us as useful tools. Nothing more. We have shared our medical knowledge freely, even when they hoarded their own discoveries. We have protected their worlds with our blood, even when they mocked our military capabilities. We have fed their hungry and healed their sick, even when they called us primitive." The assembled representatives listened in complete silence. Many of them had experienced the same dismissive treatment from alien governments. "No more," President Hayes continued. "If the galaxy wants to treat us as children, then they can learn to solve their own problems. All human aid to Council territories ends today. All human ships will return to human space. All human medical teams will come home. Let the galaxy's advanced civilizations handle their own affairs." The vote was unanimous. Every human colony, every settlement, every outpost voted to support the withdrawal. After decades of trying to earn respect through service, humanity was finally saying no. Within hours, the effects began to spread. Cargo ships carrying everything from food to rare metals turned around mid-journey. Medical teams abandoned their posts in alien hospitals. Human engineers stopped maintaining the equipment that kept dozens of worlds running. Rachel Brooks, who owned one of the largest shipping companies in human space, sent a message to all her captains. "Effective immediately, all routes through Council territory are canceled. Any ship currently in Council space should return home by the fastest route possible." The galaxy had always taken human help for granted. They assumed that humans would always be there to fill the gaps in their civilization. They never asked where their medicines came from or who maintained their trade routes. They just expected everything to keep working. But as the first day of the human withdrawal ended, cracks began to appear in the foundation of galactic society. Small cracks at first, barely noticeable to the average citizen. But cracks that would soon become fractures, and fractures that would eventually bring down the entire system. The galaxy was about to learn that some services could not be easily replaced, and some species were far more important than anyone had bothered to notice. High Counselor Kethmos called an emergency meeting 3 days after the humans left. His crystal body sparkled with what looked like amusement as he floated above his platform in the great chamber. Around him, the other council members took their usual seats, chattering excitedly about the human withdrawal. "My fellow counselors," Kethmos began, his voice ringing like a bell through the chamber, "we gather today to address the temper tantrum of our former human observers. I want to make one thing clear from the start. This council will not be threatened or bullied by any species, especially not by children who have barely learned to walk among the stars." Counselor Vexithara rose from her seat, her scales shimmering green with excitement. "The humans think they can pressure us by taking their toys and going home," she hissed. "They forget that we ruled this galaxy for thousands of years before they crawled out of their caves. We will rule it for thousands more after they are forgotten." The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. Clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones echoed off the walls as representatives from dozens of species showed their support. The message was clear. Humanity had made a foolish mistake. Admiral Corathan of the Zenthranian fleet stood up, his insect-like body towering over the other delegates. "I propose we show these humans the price of defying the Council. My fleet stands ready to blockade their pathetic colonies. A few months without trade will bring them crawling back to beg for forgiveness." "Excellent suggestion," agreed Counselor Zektar from the Hegemony Worlds. "But why stop at a blockade? We should occupy their systems and place them under Council administration. Clearly, they are too immature to govern themselves." The excitement in the chamber was building. For the first time in years, the Council had a common enemy to unite against. The humans had given them something to focus their attention on besides their usual political squabbles and territory disputes. Information Minister Zelkoth, a floating jellyfish-like creature from the deep space territories, pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as he spoke. "I will ensure that every world in Council space knows the truth about human arrogance. The galaxy must understand that we are better off without these violent, primitive creatures." But not everyone in the chamber was celebrating. Counselor Thekran of the Meridian Consortium sat quietly in his corner, his forearms folded as he listened to the rhetoric. His people had always maintained good relations with humans. They had seen firsthand how hard-working and reliable human traders were. When there was finally a pause in the celebration, Thekran stood up. "Honored colleagues," he said in his calm, measured voice, "perhaps we should consider the practical implications of the human withdrawal. My intelligence reports suggest that their departure may cause some disruption to our supply chains." The chamber fell silent for a moment, then exploded with derisive laughter. Counselor Vexithara's hissing laugh was the loudest. "Supply chains?" she repeated mockingly. "What could humans possibly supply that we cannot produce ourselves? They are cargo haulers and manual laborers, nothing more. The humans do provide certain medical services," Thekran continued, ignoring the laughter. "And their security forces have been maintaining order in several outer rim sectors." "Medical services?" scoffed Dr. Kritos, the Arcturus representative, who served as the Council's chief scientist. "Human medicine is crude and simplistic. Our own medical technology is centuries ahead of anything they can produce." Admiral Corathan's mandibles clicked with amusement. "As for security, my fleets can handle a few pirates and raiders. The outer rim problems will be solved within days, once we deploy proper military assets." Counselor Fexdara from the Keltorian Republic tried to support Thekran's concerns. She had detailed economic reports that showed how integrated human operations had become with Council commerce. "If I may present some data on the extent of human involvement in our trade networks—" "Enough!" Kethmos interrupted, his crystal form flashing with anger. "I will not listen to human sympathizers spread panic and doubt. The facts are simple. Humans are one young species among hundreds of mature civilizations. Their departure changes nothing." The High Counselor's words carried the weight of absolute authority. The chamber fell silent as he continued. "We have survived stellar wars, galactic plagues, and the rise and fall of dozens of species. We will certainly survive the absence of glorified pack animals." Over the following days, the Council's propaganda machine went into full operation. News broadcasts across the galaxy painted the human withdrawal as a childish tantrum that would soon be forgotten. Reports claimed that council worlds were actually celebrating the departure of the troublesome humans. The military preparations began immediately. Admiral Corthan assembled a massive fleet at the edge of human space. Hundreds of warships from across the council gathered in an impressive display of power. The plan was simple: make a show of force that would convince the humans to return to their proper place. "When they see our armada," Admiral Corthan told his officers, "they will realize how foolish they have been. One demonstration of our superior technology will end this rebellion before it begins." Other council members began planning the punishment they would impose once humanity surrendered. Economic sanctions, territorial restrictions, and mandatory oversight of human colonies were all discussed. Some suggested that humans should be forbidden from leaving their home system without council permission. "We must ensure this never happens again," declared Councillor Vexthera during one planning session. "Once we bring them back, we will make certain they understand the consequences of defying their betters." The Council's confidence was absolute. They had ruled the galaxy for millennia. They commanded fleets that could destroy entire solar systems. They controlled trade routes that spanned thousands of light years. How could one primitive species possibly challenge their authority? But even as they planned their victory celebrations, the first reports were starting to come in from the outer territories. Small problems at first, supply delays here and there, minor security incidents in remote sectors, nothing that seemed important enough to interrupt the Council's grand plans. Councillor Thekran continued to receive troubling intelligence reports, but his concerns were dismissed as nervousness. Councillor Vexthera kept trying to present her economic data, but was told that she was overcomplicating simple problems. The galaxy's leaders were too busy planning humanity's punishment to notice the cracks that were already forming in their perfect civilization. They were so certain of their superiority that they could not imagine a universe where they might actually need the species they had just driven away. The Council's arrogance was complete, and that arrogance would soon become their downfall. Dr. Zathara had been working at Rigel Prime General Hospital for 30 years. She had never seen anything like what was happening now. The emergency room was packed with patients, and more were arriving every hour. But the problem was not injuries or accidents. The problem was that people were dying from diseases that had been cured decades ago. "Doctor, we need more nano-healers," called Nurse Veklos from across the trauma bay. "The patient in bed 7 is not responding to conventional treatment." Zathara looked at her medical supply cabinet. The nano-healers were gone. The regeneration boosters were gone. Even the basic pain medications were running low. All of these medicines came from human factories, and the supply ships had stopped coming 2 weeks ago. "Use what we have," she told the nurse, but they both knew it would not be enough. The patient in bed 7 was a child with cellular decay syndrome. Before human medicine, children with this disease always died. The nano-healers could repair the damaged cells and give the child a normal life. Without them, there was nothing Zathara could do except watch the child suffer. She tried to call the human medical suppliers, but all the communication channels had been cut by council order. The humans were not allowed to trade with council worlds anymore. As far as the council was concerned, alien medicine would fill the gap. But alien medicine had not advanced much in the past 50 years. Why develop new treatments when human doctors were already solving every medical problem? Why spend money on research when human pharmaceuticals were cheap and effective? Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. Hospitals that had grown dependent on human medicine were facing shortages they had never imagined. Patients were dying from diseases that had become minor inconveniences thanks to human treatments. On the planet Xerion, Mayor Kelva watched the evacuation ships leave orbit. The human security forces had been protecting his world for 8 years. In that time, pirate attacks had dropped to 0. Trade had flourished. Xerion had gone from a poor frontier world to a prosperous hub of commerce. "Sir," said his aide, a young Keltorian named Gentar, "the last human transport just cleared the atmosphere. We are on our own now." Kelva looked at the defensive grid around his planet. 3 orbital stations with light weapons and a handful of patrol boats. Before the humans arrived, this had been the best Xerion could afford. But the raiders who plagued this sector had ships with military-grade weapons and shields. The local defenses had never been able to stop them. "How long do you think we have?" Keleva asked. Gentar checked his scanner reports. Long-range sensors are picking up unidentified ships at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, moving in formation. The pirates had been watching and waiting. They knew the humans were gone. They knew Xerion was defenseless again. And they were coming to reclaim what they considered their territory. The attack came 3 hours later. 12 raider ships swept down on the planet like vultures. The orbital stations managed to destroy one ship before being overwhelmed. The Gyanor. Patrol boats were outgunned and outnumbered. Within 6 hours, Xerion had fallen. Captain Betty Walsh watched the destruction from her ship, the Earth Cruiser Defender, as it jumped out of the system. Her orders were clear. No human ship was to engage Council territory threats. They were to observe and record only. "Captain," said her weapons officer, Lieutenant Mark Davis, "we could take those raiders easily. Our missile systems alone could clear the entire attacking force." Betty's hands were clenched on her command chair. She had friends on Xerion, good people who had welcomed human protection and built peaceful lives under its umbrella. Now she was watching them die and she could do nothing to help. "Negative," she said through gritted teeth. "We stick to our orders. This is what the Council wanted. Let them handle their own problems." The economic collapse was spreading faster than anyone had expected. On the core world of Zenthra Prime, Shipping Administrator Voskek stared at his cargo manifests in disbelief. 3/4 of the scheduled deliveries were not going to happen. The human cargo companies had handled most of the long-distance shipping between systems. "Sir," said his assistant, "the rare Earth shipments from the asteroid mining stations have stopped completely. Those were all human operations." Voskek pulled up the production schedules for Council military equipment. The new warships, the advanced weapons, the shield generators, they all required rare metals that came from human mining operations. Without those materials, production would stop within weeks. He tried to find alternative suppliers, but there were none. Other species had never bothered to develop large-scale mining operations. Why should they when human companies were happy to do the dangerous work of asteroid mining? "Contact the Mining Guild," Voskek ordered. "Tell them we need emergency contracts for rare earth extraction." The response came back within hours. The Mining Guild did not have the equipment or expertise for the kind of large-scale operations that humans ran. It would take years to build the necessary infrastructure, and decades to train crews to match human efficiency. On 43 worlds, food riots were beginning. These planets had specialized in manufacturing or services, importing most of their food from human agricultural worlds. The terraforming technology that made farming possible on marginal worlds had been shared freely by human engineers. But when the humans left, they took their knowledge with them. Farm Administrator Telros walked through the dying crop fields on Beta Centauri 4. The soil enhancement systems were failing. The atmospheric processors were running at half capacity. The genetically modified crops that fed 2 billion people were starting to wither. The human technicians were the only ones who understood these systems. His chief engineer reported, "We have the manuals, but they are too complex. We need the humans to come back and fix the problems." But the humans were not coming back. The Council had made that very clear. Director Scott Adams sat in his office on Earth, reading the intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The Strategic Intelligence Division had been monitoring the situation since the withdrawal began. The results were exactly what human analysts had predicted. Phase 1 is complete, he told his staff during the morning briefing. The immediate dependencies are becoming obvious. Medical systems failing, security gaps opening, supply chains collapsing. But this is just the beginning. His aide, a young woman named Carol Stone, raised her hand. "Sir, we are getting requests for emergency aid from over 200 worlds. Some of them are offering substantial payments for human medical supplies." Scott shook his head. "All requests are denied. The Council wanted to see what the galaxy looks like without human help. We are going to show them exactly that." Admiral Corathon's grand fleet patrolled empty space around human territory. The massive show of force was supposed to intimidate humanity into surrender. But the human worlds had gone completely silent. No communication, no negotiation, no response at all to council demands. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving distress calls from 17 council worlds. They are requesting immediate military assistance to deal with pirate raids." Corathon looked at his fleet deployment. He had concentrated most of the council's mobile forces for this demonstration against humanity. The outer territories were virtually undefended. "Dispatch the 3rd Squadron to handle the pirate problem," he ordered. But one squadron could not be in 17 places at once. And every day more distress calls were coming in. The carefully maintained piece of council space was crumbling, and there were not enough ships to hold it together. The galaxy was burning, and the council was finally beginning to realize that they had lit the match themselves. High Counselor Kethmos stood alone in the great chamber where thousands of delegates once gathered. The massive hall felt empty and cold. Most of the council members had returned to their home worlds to deal with the growing disasters. Those who remained sat in small groups, whispering among themselves like frightened children. 3 months had passed since the human withdrawal. 3 months of watching their perfect civilization fall apart piece by piece. The death toll was climbing into the millions. Entire sectors had gone dark. The outer rim territories were controlled by pirates and raiders again. And still, the humans refused to answer any calls for help. "Report," Kethmos said to his aide, though he dreaded hearing the latest news. "Rigel Prime has declared a medical emergency," the aide read from his tablet. 50,000 dead from diseases that were previously curable. The Centauri Food Consortium reports total crop failure on 18 worlds. The Mining Guild estimates it will take 15 years to replace human extraction operations. Kethmos felt his crystal form dim with despair. How had they not seen this coming? How had an entire galaxy become so dependent on one species without anyone noticing? Counselor Vexathera entered the chamber, but she was not the proud, arrogant leader who had mocked humanity months ago. Her scales had lost their shine and she moved like an old creature carrying a heavy burden. Her own homeworld was starving because they had stopped growing food decades ago. Why farm when human agricultural worlds could feed everyone so cheaply? "Any word from the humans?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Nothing," Kethmos replied. "Their colonies remain completely silent. Our ships cannot even get close enough to deliver messages. They have somehow made their entire territory invisible to our sensors." What they did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this possibility for years. Human scientists had developed stealth technology that could hide entire star systems, not to attack anyone, but to ensure that if humanity ever needed to disappear, they could do so completely. Counselor Thecaran arrived with a datapad full of reports from his intelligence network. His people, the Meridians, had always been skilled at gathering information. What he had learned was terrifying. "The situation is worse than we thought," he said, his forearms trembling as he spoke. The humans were not just providing services. They were the foundation that everything else was built on. Their cargo ships carried 60% of all goods moved between systems. Their medical research prevented 17 different plagues from spreading. Their security forces maintained peace in 43 sectors. He paused and looked around the nearly empty chamber. But that is not the worst part. The worst part is that they were doing all of this quietly, without asking for credit or recognition. They were holding our civilization together and we never even noticed. The communication system chimed with an incoming message. For a moment, hope flashed through the chamber. Maybe the humans were finally ready to talk. But the message was from Admiral Corathon, and his news was devastating. "The demonstration fleet has been recalled." His voice echoed through the chamber. "Every ship is needed for emergency response. We have lost control of 7 entire sectors. Pirate fleets are moving toward the core worlds. The great military force that was supposed to intimidate humanity had been scattered to deal with crises across the galaxy. But there were not enough ships to handle all the problems. The Council's military had been designed to fight other organized governments, not to police an entire galaxy falling into chaos. On Earth, Ambassador Jake Martinez sat in President Nicole Hayes' office, reading the latest intelligence reports. The data was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Satisfying because it proved that humanity's contributions had been far more important than anyone realized. Heartbreaking because millions of innocent people were suffering for their leaders' arrogance. "They are starting to understand," Jake said, setting down the reports. "But their pride still will not let them admit they were wrong." President Hayes looked out the window at the bustling streets of New Geneva. Life on human worlds continued as normal. Better than normal, actually, because all the resources that had been flowing to the galaxy were now staying in human space. Hospitals had surplus medicine. Cargo companies were finding new routes between human colonies. The military was finally able to rest and refit after decades of protecting other species' territory. "Any official requests for help?" she asked. "Hundreds," Jake replied, "but all through back channels, unofficial contacts from individual worlds. Nothing from the Council itself." The President nodded. She had expected this. The Council's pride would not allow them to officially ask for help from the species they had dismissed as primitive. They would rather watch their civilization burn than admit they had been wrong about humanity. The first official contact came, not from the Council but from Councillor Thekron. His message was simple and desperate. "We need to talk." Jake's response was equally direct. "The time for talking has passed." The Council made their position clear. Now they must live with the consequences. But even as Jake sent that message, he knew that eventually something would have to change. The suffering across the galaxy was real, and innocent people were paying the price for their leaders' mistakes. On Zenthra Prime, the Council's capital world, power shortages were becoming common. The energy systems that powered the massive cities required rare elements that came from human mining operations. Backup systems were failing. The lights that had never gone out in 1,000 years were starting to flicker. Dr. Kritos, who had once mocked human medicine as crude and primitive, sat in his laboratory surrounded by failed experiments. He had been trying for months to recreate the human nanohealers that could repair cellular damage. His most advanced attempts worked for minutes before breaking down. The human versions worked for years. "How did they do it?" he muttered to himself as another test batch failed. "What did we miss?" The answer was simple, though he would never admit it. Humans had not been trying to prove their superiority or guard their secrets. They had been trying to help people. That fundamental difference in motivation had led to breakthroughs that pride and arrogance could never achieve. Councillor Vexithera made the final, desperate attempt. She recorded a personal message to Ambassador Martinez, setting aside all the formal protocols and diplomatic language. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "My people are dying. Children are starving. Our worlds are burning. We were wrong about humanity. We were wrong about everything. Tell us what you want. Tell us what it will take to fix this." Jake watched the message 3 times before responding. When he did, his answer was not what she expected. "We do not want anything from you, Counselor. We never did. We wanted to be partners. We wanted to be equals. We wanted to build something better together. But you saw us as servants. You saw us as tools to be used and discarded." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "The galaxy is broken, Counselor. But it was broken long before we left. We just stopped hiding the cracks." In the empty council chamber, High Counselor Kethmus finally understood. The humans had not withdrawn to punish the galaxy. They had withdrawn to save themselves from a system that would never see them as anything more than useful servants. The great civilization that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was dying, not because of war or plague or natural disaster, but because of their own arrogance. They had driven away the people who made their society function, and now they were facing the true cost of their pride. Outside the chamber windows, the lights of the capital city flickered and went dark, one section at a time. The age of the Galactic Council was ending, not with the glory of battle, but with the quiet darkness of neglect. And somewhere in the depths of space, humanity continued building something new, something better, something based on respect rather than dominance. The galaxy would have to find its own way forward. And maybe someday when they had learned humility, humans might be willing to help them again.